Hello, I'm Jackie Poole, a retired occupational therapist specialist in dementia, but still very active as a campaigner for the disability rights of people who are living with the symptoms of the condition. In this short video, and following the launch of the World Alzheimer's Report on Rehabilitation, I'm going to describe the main features of Cognitive Rehabilitation Programme as developed in my work as an associate of the Research Centre. So the rehabilitation process is actually the same format, regardless of what the underlying needs of the individual are. And particularly when it comes to assessment, it should always be person-centred and holistic. But when it's applied to people who are living with dementia, then there are some specific areas that need to be considered. So if the person living with dementia is actually recovering from, for example, hip surgery, then of course it's important to assess their cognitive abilities and difficulties in order to make the best use of the physical rehabilitation programme. But in this presentation, what we're particularly going to look at is the functional difficulties that are caused by the cognitive impairments specifically. So this is really as a cognitive rehabilitation programme as we developed it at the University of Exeter, and it's called the Great Cognitive Rehabilitation Programme there, is a one-to-one individual treatment programme. It's not a group programme because it is very individualised to the person, not only to their physical health and their emotional state, their particular cognitive difficulties, but more than anything else to their specific goal that they want to be able to achieve. So the planning of the cognitive rehab process begins with identifying, once the assessment's been done, identifying with the individual what are their personal goals. And from that, it's possible then to break that down into attainment stages. At that point, then, it's possible for the cognitive rehab practitioner to be able to identify the best rehab strategies and techniques to use in order to help the person to achieve those attainment stages. And of course, all the while along the way, it's important to ensure that there is emotional support for the person. So as I've said, the implementation tends to be, is a one-to-one individualised approach. And usually what we found in our research of the GREAT programme is that 6 once-a-week sessions with a cognitive rehab practitioner are sufficient to be able to help the person to achieve their goal. But it's not for the faint-hearted. Along the way, in between those once-a-week sessions, the individual must be able to engage in homework, if you like, practice and repetition and rehearsal in order to really embed that new learning or relearning, if it's something that they've lost the ability to do, into their new way of doing something. So it's very helpful if there is a care partner involved, because of course they can support that homework too, and it's very helpful to have somebody who helps to motivate you as well. In terms of evaluation, the goal attainment scores themselves, the level of goal attainment that the person's achieved, is of course one way of evaluating. But on top of that, there are others such as activity of daily living scores, the Pool Activity Level PAL cognitive level score, which looks at the cognitive level of functional ability, well-being scores, and of course potentially emotional state scores such as the depression rating. And I've put on here for you at the bottom of this slide 2 links which are to free access to the cognitive PAL assessment and also to the wellbeing profile produced by the Bradford University. When the evaluation has been completed, then of course it will depend on what the outcomes of that are. It might require that your evaluation shows you not quite hitting the mark with your rehab plan, and it's important then to amend that plan and continue down a slightly different route. Or the person has achieved that goal that they wish to 100% maybe, or sufficient that they're happy with. And in which case, of course, to sign the person off, it would be important to give them a maintenance plan to be able to continue the good work and to signpost them to other support services. So setting SMART goals is a very critical part of the whole cognitive rehabilitation process. SMART goals, as you can see on here, it's a mnemonic. The initials stand for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And by specific, it means rather than having a very broad and vague goal, such as remembering past events, it would go down to a much more lengthier, very specific goal that not only identifies the three things in this case that the person is going to be able to recall each day, but also how they're going to go about doing that. And that way then you become able to measure the success or otherwise of the goal. So it directs attention towards that goal, towards personally relevant activities that the person has selected for themselves that they wish to be able to perform. And it might be something new that they've never done before. It might be being able to use a mobile phone or a computer in order to stay in touch with family and friends. Or it could be something that they've lost the ability to do, such as remembering the names of family and friends, and therefore losing their confidence to take part in social groups. And we find that SMART goals help to motivate people to keep on with the effort and the persistence to achieve that goal. Not only that, though, not only is it helpful to the person who is receiving the rehabilitation, it's also important for the cognitive rehabilitation practitioner, because it will help them, the goal will help them to identify the strategies and techniques that they're going to support the person to use. And of course, it also helps them to break down that goal into attainable stages. And that then means that the rehab practitioner can measure against those attainable stages to evaluate the level of achievement. So we tend to describe the full goal as 100% attainment, and then we break down that 100% into usually 25, 50 and 75%. So whether the person is a quarter way there, half a way there, or 3/4 of the way there. So it's usually quite useful in the goal if it's described in a way that helps that to happen quite easily. So in the SMART goal on this slide, you'll see that the person wants to be able to, and this is a real goal from a real person, wanted to be able to recall what they'd done during the day. And this was so they could actually talk to family on the Zoom call in the evenings. So what we did was help the person to identify to begin with that they were going to write down in a diary every day after dinner the three things that they've done that they want to recall, and then use a method which I'll show you in a moment to be able to recall them and without looking at the diary, so that they were making the brain do the work, so restoring that ability rather than compensating for it, which would have been the case if they'd purely read out from the diary. If they'd had four things, then it would have been very easy to identify the 25, 50 and 75% attainment by just breaking it down, first of all, to one thing, then two, then three, and then finally the four. But another way of doing it is to actually look at rather than the quantity, is the timing and the frequency. So because this said every day, you could break down that 7 days a week into smaller attainable moments of perhaps to begin with 1 day, then 3 days, then 5 days, and then 7 days. So this final slide shows you the strategies that we use in cognitive rehabilitation therapy and the GREAT programme. And we can break those down into strategies that help somebody achieve a particular activity and action that they want to be able to do again, or strategies that help the person to be able to recall information. So grading and chunking, whether it's grading an activity or chunking the information into smaller steps, are kind of the same thing, but one for information and one for activity, but they reflect the smaller goal attainment stages that you'll already have done. And then there's lots of different methods and techniques for helping the person to work towards those. So in the activity strategies, action-based learning happens after modelling of the action. So first of all, the cognitive rehab practitioner would model the actions to the person that need to do in order to achieve the full activity that they want to be able to do. So it's a first watch me approach, and then the person is encouraged to have a go at doing it themselves, so action-based learning. And it's through doing that repeatedly over and over, what you're doing is helping the person to embed that new learning into the procedural memory, the muscle memory of the joints and muscles of the body. We can also use prompts and fading prompts, decreasing the specificity of those prompts. So from saying, oh, don't forget you've got to look in your diary, to where do you look to find out that information, for example. When it comes to information strategies, again, prompts and fading prompts are helpful, but also using lots of wordplay, such as mnemonics, alliteration, such as, I don't know, maybe if you've got trying to remember somebody's name and she's a very happy little girl, you might say Happy Hillary, for example. So you've got that alliteration going on. You might use rhymes, acronyms, somebody who wanted to remember their important items to take with them when they went to the shops, would use the acronym BMW, which stood for Bus Pass, Mobile Phone and Wallet. And people choose their own word plays because then they're more meaningful to them. Now, the last three on this slide are particularly important and used across all, and they are errorless learning, effortful processing, and expanding rehearsal. Errorless learning means building up the cognitive rehabilitation strategies in a way that helps the person not to make the mistakes, because we don't want them to learn the mistakes. And that's very different to trial and error learning, where you learn from your mistakes. What we're trying to do is help the person not make the mistake in the first place, because we don't want that to be the bit that's learned. On top of that, we can use very positive language, and of course I mean affirming language, but also describe to the person what it is they need to be doing rather than telling them what they shouldn't be doing. So say write in your diary on the correct date rather than don't write on that date, because one can be more confusing than the other. Effortful processing is making the brain work many times harder than just one single way. So if you're trying to remember information, and I'll use the diary approach again as we've started with that, when the person is writing down in their diary what they're doing, it's helpful to also say it out loud as they're writing it, because then they're putting the process of those words not only through the writing elements of the brain function, but also the speaking elements. It's important for them, if possible, to also use the doing part as well, so doing actions. With the writing, of course, the hand is moving in a particular way, but for more of the activity kind of strategies, you are going to be doing a lot more of the doing. Expanding rehearsal is practicing over a period of time, and first of all, the practitioner would get the person with the condition to practice over and over during their 1 hour session with them. And they would start off doing an initial repetition and practice within 15-20 seconds of having shown the person or described to the person what they want them to do. They then double that time frame. So then they would say after 30 seconds, and at this point the person is holding this information purely really in their short-term memory. After that, hopefully what's happened, if they're able to then at the next doubling at 1 minute, they will have moved that information or that action into their longer term memory, into their very recent long-term memory. And then by doubling up the time frames to then 2 minutes, 4 minutes, you're allowing some space between to help the person to hold on to the information or the action for longer and longer. And we usually reckon by the time the person has achieved and been able to continue at 20 minutes, so gone from 10 to 20 minutes, then they've kind of got it. And then the point will then be to rehearse and practice in their homework throughout the week until it becomes truly embedded. Now, if you're very interested in becoming a cognitive rehabilitation practitioner, hopefully you'll be very interested in the bottom of this slide, which gives you the link to the free e-learning course that you can do in order to become a practitioner. I do hope that you found this information useful, and thank you very much for listening.